He was 18 when he stood in that parking lot for the last time, looking at the apartment building where he'd spent every summer since he was 7. The key was still in his pocket. His younger sister Maya sat on the curb behind him, her backpack between her knees. And she wasn't crying, but she wasn't talking either. Their mom had been gone 3 months. The landlord had been patient, then firm, then done. They had 48 hours to clear out, and after that, they had nowhere that felt like home. The apartment smelled like old carpet and the lemon cleaner their mom used to buy in bulk. Maya walked through the rooms, touching things. The couch, the kitchen counter, the wall where their heights were marked in pencil, year after year, until the marks just stopped. He didn't tell her to hurry. He packed boxes in silence, folding clothes that still smelled faintly like lavender detergent, stacking books they'd read together on long weekends. Everything fit into the bed of a borrowed truck. That's what got him. 18 years, and it all fit in one load. They drove to their aunt's place that night. She lived 2 hours north, in a town they barely knew. She had a spare room and she meant well, but the house was small and loud, full of cousins who didn't know how to talk to them, who stayed too long or not at all. Maya shared a bed with 2 younger girls, who kicked in their sleep. He slept on a couch that smelled like dog and cigarettes. Every morning he woke up before dawn with his neck stiff and the feeling that he was disappearing. Maya was 15. She didn't say much those first few weeks. She went to school, came home, did homework at the kitchen table, with headphones on. But he saw the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Like she was waiting for him to have an answer. Like she believed he knew what to do next. He didn't. But he also couldn't let her see that. One night, about a month in, they sat outside on the back steps, after everyone else had gone to bed. The air was cold and clear. You could see more stars here than in the city. Maya pulled her sleeves over her hands and said, "What are we doing?" Not like a question. Like a statement. Like she'd been holding it in, and finally couldn't anymore. He didn't answer right away. He didn't have an answer. But sitting there in the quiet, he realized something. They could stay here and let other people decide what their lives looked like. Or they could try to build something that was theirs. He said, "What if we left?" She looked at him. He said, "What if we got our own place? Figured it out," she said. "With what money?" He said, "I don't know yet, but we could try." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." It was a stupid idea. He worked part-time at a grocery store, stocking shelves and bagging groceries. He'd saved a little, but not enough. Not even close. Maya had no income. They had no cosigner, no credit, no references that mattered. But he started looking anyway. He searched rental listings on his phone during breaks, called landlords who hung up the moment he mentioned his age. Most places wanted first month, last month, and a deposit. Some wanted proof of income at 3 times the rent. He did the math over and over, and it never added up. Then he found a guy named Ron, who owned a duplex on the east side of a town 30 minutes away. The listing was old, the photos were blurry, and the rent was lower than anything else he'd seen. He called. Ron picked up on the first ring. His voice was rough, like he smoked too much, but he didn't hang up. He listened. He said, "Come by tomorrow." The duplex was small and beaten down. The paint was peeling. One of the windows was cracked and covered with cardboard and tape. The yard was dirt and weeds. But it had 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen with a stove that worked. Ron stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said, "I'm not running a charity. You miss rent, you're out. No exceptions." He nodded. Ron said, "You got first month?" He said yes. It wasn't true, but he said it anyway. Ron looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Maya, who was standing behind him, quiet and small. Ron sighed. He said, "You got 2 weeks." They moved in on a Saturday. Their aunt helped them load the truck, but she didn't say much. He could tell she thought they were making a mistake. Maybe they were. The duplex was empty except for a broken folding chair someone had left behind. They had no furniture, no dishes, no curtains. That first night they sat on the floor and ate gas station sandwiches and drank water from the tap, using plastic cups Maya had taken from their aunt's house. The lights worked, but they were dim and flickering. The heat worked, but barely. It was April and still cold at night. They slept in sleeping bags on the floor of the bigger bedroom, back to back for warmth. He didn't sleep much. He kept thinking about the 2 weeks. About what would happen if he couldn't make it work. The next morning he went out and picked up every extra shift he could find. He worked mornings at the grocery store, evenings bussing tables at a diner. He worked doubles on weekends. He came home late smelling like fryer grease and bleach, and Maya would be awake, sitting on the floor with her homework spread out around her, lit by a lamp they'd bought at a thrift store for $3. She never complained. She made ramen on the stove. She kept the place clean. She walked to school every morning, even though it was 2 miles each way, because they couldn't afford a bus pass yet. But it wasn't enough. By the end of the first week, he'd made maybe half of what they needed. He started doing odd jobs. Mowing lawns, hauling junk, painting fences. Anything someone would pay him cash for. He put up flyers at the laundromat and the corner store. Most people didn't call. The ones who did paid him 10 or 15 bucks and acted like they were doing him a favor. He smiled and said thank you and counted every dollar. Maya started helping. She didn't ask, she just did. She babysat for a neighbor. She walked dogs. She sold some of her old clothes and books online and handed him the money without a word. He told her she didn't have to. She said I know. But the look on her face said don't argue. So he didn't. They made rent. Barely. Ron took the cash and counted it twice and said, see you next month. They had $17 left. That night they sat on the floor and Maya laughed. And it was the first time he'd heard her laugh in months. He asked what was funny. She said, we're gonna die here. But she was smiling. And so was he. The next few months were a blur. Work. Sleep. Work again. They picked up furniture piece by piece. A couch from the side of the road that they cleaned with dish soap and a rag. A table someone was throwing out. Mismatched chairs. A bed frame Maya found on a neighborhood swap page. They painted the walls with cheap paint from the hardware store. It looked uneven and streaky, but it was theirs. Slowly, the place started to feel less like a box and more like a home, but it was hard. He was tired all the time. He missed shifts because he overslept. He got written up at the diner for snapping at a customer. He started falling behind on groceries, on utilities, on everything. 1 month they couldn't pay the power bill, and the lights got shut off. They lived by candlelight for 4 days, until he got paid. Maya did her homework by flashlight. She didn't complain. But he saw the way her shoulders hunched when she thought he wasn't looking. He felt like he was failing her. Then something shifted. A guy at the diner asked if he knew anything about cars. He didn't, but he said yeah. The guy had an old Honda that wouldn't start. He spent 3 hours in a parking lot watching YouTube videos on his phone and trying things until the engine finally turned over. The guy paid him 40 bucks and told his friends. Within a week, he had 2 more calls. Then 5, then 10. People started asking for him by name. He didn't know much, but he learned fast. He bought a cheap socket set and kept it in his trunk. He started charging more. 50, 75, sometimes 100 if the job was big. It wasn't stable, but it was something. Maya found her own rhythm too. She started tutoring kids at her school. English, math, history. She was good at it. Patient, she charged $10 an hour and worked after school in the library. She came home with cash folded in her pocket and a look on her face like she'd figured something out. She said, I think I like teaching. He said, you're good at it. She shrugged, but he could tell she was proud. By the end of the first year, they were still broke. But they weren't drowning. They had food in the fridge. The lights stayed on. They started talking about things that weren't just survival. Maya wanted to take the SAT. He wanted to get certified as a mechanic. They started saving. Not much, $20 here, $30 there. It sat in an envelope in the kitchen drawer, and they didn't touch it unless they had to. One night in late fall, they were sitting at the table eating spaghetti Maya had made. She said, do you think Mom would be proud of us? He stopped chewing. He looked at her. She was staring at her plate, her fork halfway to her mouth. He said, yeah, I think she would. She nodded. She didn't cry, neither did he. But something settled between them. Something that had been tight and knotted for a long time. They kept going. He worked. She studied. They argued sometimes. About money. About the future. About whether they should have just stayed at their aunt's. But they always came back to the same place. They'd chosen this. They'd chosen each other. And that meant something. By the time he turned 20, they'd lived in the duplex for almost 2 years. Maya was 17. She was applying to colleges. He was working full-time at a repair shop and getting certified on the side. They weren't rich. They weren't even comfortable. But they had a place. They had a routine. They had something that felt like a life. One afternoon, Ron stopped by. He said he was selling the duplex. Said they had 60 days. He felt his stomach drop. Maya was in her room studying. He didn't tell her right away. He spent that night looking at listings again. Doing math that didn't work. Feeling the same panic he'd felt 2 years ago. But this time it was different. This time he had references. He had income. He had a history of showing up. They found a place. A little bigger. A little nicer, in a neighborhood with actual sidewalks. The rent was higher, but they could cover it. They moved in on a Saturday, just like before, but this time, they had furniture. They had dishes and curtains and a coffee maker that actually worked. They had a rhythm. They had each other. Maya started college that fall. She commuted. She kept tutoring. She kept helping with rent. He told her she didn't have to. She said, I know, but I want to. He didn't argue. Sometimes he thought about that parking lot. About the apartment that smelled like lemon cleaner. About the way Maya sat on the curb, silent and small, waiting for him to know what to do. He hadn't known. He still didn't, most days. But they'd figured it out anyway. Not because they were smart or lucky. Just because they didn't stop. Now, when he came home from work and saw the light on in the kitchen, and heard Maya talking on the phone to a friend, laughing about something he didn't understand, he felt something he didn't have a name for. Not pride, exactly. Not relief. Something quieter. Something that felt like they'd made it. Not to the end, just to the next part. And that was enough.